And now we cross over to our Oseong for global insight and an in-depth look at the important developments in world affairs.
Thank you, Morgan. It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. Hypersonic missiles, vehicles that travel 5 times faster than the speed of sound, often made global headlines in the year of 2021. Compared to ballistic missiles, hypersonics, they travel within the atmosphere and are generally more maneuverable, allowing them to hit a target more precisely with a much shorter flight time. Their trajectory is also unpredictable, which makes them much harder to intercept, and they are capable of carrying either conventional or nuclear warheads. As countries such as North Korea, Russia and China make speedy developments in their technology, there's been growing concern around the world and questions as to whether there will be a hypersonic arms race, particularly here in East Asia. To discuss this, we turn to Pavel Podvig, senior researcher at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, and Patty Jane Geller, policy analyst for nuclear deterrence and missile defense at the Heritage Foundation. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us today. And well, let's begin with you, Dr. Podvig. Now, how far along are Russia and China in the hypersonic missile technology, and why have they been advancing so much quicker than the United States?
Well, to begin with, I just need to mention that hypersonic is a relative term here. In fact, any regular ballistic missile is already hypersonic, and because it does reach hypersonic speed at various points of its trajectory. What's usually understood by this term is the hypersonic gliders, which, as you mentioned, fly mostly within the atmosphere and use the atmosphere to sustain their flight. And it's an old technology, in fact, and one of the reasons it wasn't developed that much around the world until recently is because there is no really good military application for that. And in a way, the Soviet Union discovered that application back in the 80s, and that was defeating missile defense. And in fact, the program that today is the system that is deployed in Russia is in fact the system that goes all the way back to the 80s. It's more than 35 years old now. So in a way, Russia is ahead because it's started early. But still, the fact of the matter is that in terms of mission, in terms of capabilities, these hypersonic gliders do not really offer that much compared to what I would call a regular ballistic missile.
And Dr. Geller, well, what's been worrying many observers around the world is China. Well, China's pursuit of hypersonics and military modernization plans has been alarming observers and countries here in East Asia as well. And well, what does China's change of nuclear posture indicate about its intentions or ambitions?
Nuclear buildup and its pursuit of hypersonic weapons confirms what we already know about Beijing's aggressive ambitions to gain a military advantage over the U.S. and achieve global parity, if not superiority, with the United States. So historically, China has maintained a posture of minimum nuclear deterrence, where they've only had kind of the minimum arsenal that they needed, only a couple of hundred nuclear weapons to just deter attack on its homeland. But now we're seeing a very rapid expansion of China's nuclear forces. Just in the last year, analysts discovered that China could be building up to 360 new missile silos. They tested a hypersonic weapon that could be armed with a nuclear bomb that can orbit the globe before traveling to its target. And a recent Department of Defense military report on China concluded that China is on track to become a nuclear peer with the United States and Russia by the end of the decade. And I hear a lot. I hear this from Beijing and from others say that China's buildup, well, it's part of self-defense, or it's an effort to push back against U.S. aggression. But the fact remains that the United States has not expanded either its offensive or its defensive forces, its nuclear forces, for the last few decades. So there's nothing that the U.S. is doing that's driving this. Rather, I think that China's nuclear expansion and pursuit of hypersonics fits into President Xi's goals of transforming China's military into a first-tier force. If China has a stronger nuclear arsenal, it's able to backstop its conventional forces in a conflict or crisis and threaten the U.S. or compel the U.S. to back down if we don't have the forces to maintain the strong nuclear deterrent that we've enjoyed over China for the last several decades.
And Dr. Geller, one of the concerns about hypersonic glide vehicles seems to be that they could go undetected by sneaking under early warning radar. Would this capability change the calculation regarding nuclear warfare?
So this capability certainly presents a unique challenge for the United States. Like you said, hypersonic weapons fly at very high speeds, at least 5 times the speed of sound, at altitudes in the sky that enable them to potentially avoid sensors and radars and reduce warning times. So I'm not sure I would say this would change the calculation of nuclear warfare. The U.S. is building capabilities to better be able to detect and track these missiles. But the problem is that if China is able to use these weapons to avoid early warning, they can be used for a first strike sneak attack. We won't be able to see them. And this capability undermines the core of deterrence. And for this reason, such systems that are able to avoid early warning have been regarded as highly destabilizing. For example, the U.S. does have a hypersonic weapons program, but we don't plan to arm them with nuclear weapons, which is what adversaries are doing. But the last thing I'll say, the main takeaway here is that China's nuclear-armed hypersonic weapons program are clearly deliberately designed to undermine our military advantage. They're making it clear what they're trying to do. No country needs hypersonic weapons that can avoid early warning for things like self-defense. We see that China is on the offensive and the threat is growing to the U.S.
And Dr. Podvig, well, you've said that hypersonic missiles, they're nothing new, but you have warned of strategic miscalculations, though. How worried should we be about such prospects? How worried should we be about an escalating arms race of hypersonic missiles?
Well, as any new military system, of course, and that is different from the previous ones, definitely these hypersonic gliders do create new risks, and sometimes we don't really have a good way of thinking about those risks and dealing with them. These gliders are indeed a bit more difficult to detect, and they do give you less warning time. However, I would definitely not overestimate that factor. They are perfectly detectable, and in terms of warning time, again, regular ballistic missiles are already bad enough, and in that sense, the speed or the low-flying trajectory of those hypersonic gliders does not really present any kind of revolutionary change, and it doesn't really give any state, whether it's China or the United States or Russia, the kind of a first strike capability. That capability requires much more than just several gliders that can fly trajectories that are not quite conventional.
And Dr. Podvig, well, North Korea fired a missile last week and it claimed that it was a hypersonic one. And now the South Korean military disputes this and suggests that it was just an ordinary ballistic missile that could have been intercepted. And while, of course, there is very little information about North Korea's hypersonics program, what is your opinion on this? How advanced or threatening do you think North Korea's current capabilities are?
I think, as far as I can tell, you're right. There is not much information about it, but the consensus appears to be that it wasn't the glider, in the sense that it wasn't the system of the kind that Russia has deployed or China is deploying. Rather, it was a maneuverable warhead that was launched on top of a missile that flew over what is known as depressed trajectory, that is, trajectory that flies lower than usual. It takes more energy, but it can be done. And in a way, it is, as I keep saying, it is as bad in a way as a regular ballistic missile, in the sense that, yes, it is a bit more difficult to intercept. But on the other hand, a regular ballistic missile is very difficult to intercept as well. So there is not much change here. And in a way, if you don't want these kind of missiles to threaten you, you should worry about missiles flying your way. Especially if that missile has a chance of being armed with a nuclear warhead, your missile defense is the last thing you would want to rely on in this situation.
Well, Dr. Geller, can hypersonic vehicles, glide vehicles, actually be stopped? Do the current anti-missile defense systems, such as THAAD, work against them?
It's possible to defend and intercept hypersonic missiles, but it's very difficult because hypersonic fly on unpredictable trajectories at high speed. Intercept different challenge. So we have a very limited capability right now to intercept hypersonic missiles, but not the system are actually designed to intercept hypersonic. So systems like that battery that deployed in South Korea and Patriot were meant for intercepting ballistic missiles, which fly on predictable trajectories that are easier to intercept. And there are two reasons why it's so challenging to intercept hypersonic. The first is that they're very hard to see. We talked about how they avoid early warning radar. And aside from that, they're also able to maneuver during their flight paths. So even if we can see hypersonic missiles, they're often difficult to keep track of because they can make a turn during their flight. And the second reason it's challenging is that it's simply hard technologically to design an interceptor that can work against such a fast-flying missile that's cruising through the atmosphere. The U.S. does have a research and development program underway for hypersonic missile interceptors, but we're still a while away from actually fielding those systems. We do have programs underway currently to improve our ability to detect and track our hypersonic missiles, which will certainly be the top priority, and at least for now, and as a prerequisite to eventually being able to have an improved interceptor capability.
And Dr. Geller, what does this all mean for security in Northeast Asia, especially for America's extended deterrence networks, particularly for allies like South Korea?
Yeah, China's hypersonic weapons development and especially its nuclear buildup are changing the military balance of power in the region in a way that's not in the favor of the U.S. or our allies like South Korea in the region. As the China threat increases, U.S. deterrence and extended deterrence becomes more in jeopardy as China finds ways to close the gap between our militaries and accrue their own advantage. Put more simply, China's weapons buildup makes conflict more likely. And the main challenge that we face for extended deterrence will be ensuring that the U.S. has the capabilities into the future that actually address or reflect the massive change in threat that we're seeing coming from China. Especially when it comes to nuclear deterrence, I'm a bit worried because the current U.S. nuclear posture was designed in 2010 for a completely different threat environment, one where China was not rapidly moving new missiles to nuclear warhead. So the challenge for extended deterrence will be for the U.S. to develop the capabilities that just posture in a way that can assure our allies that the U.S. will come to their defenses and also assure China that there's no scenario in which nuclear weapons or hypersonic weapons deployment will not be met.
Well, Dr. Podvig, now, with these concerns surrounding build-up of hypersonic missiles and a lot of countries rushing to develop them, there have been growing calls for Washington, Moscow, to get China involved as well in arms control talks. Do you think the United States and Russia will make any kind of progress on arms control during this highly anticipated talk on Monday when high-level officials meet in Geneva?
Yes, Russia and the United States are actually on track, on two parallel tracks. There is a strategic stability dialogue that was launched at the summit meeting in July last year. And then there is this discussion of what's called security guarantees that Russia initiated just recently. These are difficult conversations, but I would say I'm cautiously optimistic about the strategic stability dialogue because I think there is an understanding in the United States and in Russia that both countries want to continue the line of arms control treaties at the start, New START, that limit their strategic nuclear weapons. As for the guarantees discussion, that would be much more difficult. There are many reasons for that. But still, it is possible, and I think that we could hope that these discussions would bring an effort to return the limits on intermediate range, shorter range ballistic missiles in Europe. And that would replace the INF treaty that banned those missiles, but that was broke down 2 years ago. So again, everybody knows that these discussions will be difficult, but there is a path toward further limits on nuclear weapons, and more importantly, on transparency and accountability when it comes to nuclear weapons and missiles deployed in whether it's in Europe or globally. Ideal, of course, yes, it would be good to bring China into this discussion and also have transparency and stability and predictability in relations with China. That will be even more difficult because China has consistently been saying that it will not enter the discussion unless the United States and Russia bring their forces down to the level of China. And they have a very long way to go.
Well, thank you. That was Pavel Podvig, Senior Researcher at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, and Patty Jane Geller, Policy Analyst for Nuclear Deterrence and Missile Defense at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.